At the beginning of September, the World Economic Forum released its Global Competitiveness Report, this for 2014 through to 2015. And for the fifth year in a row, South Africa was ranked #1 out of 144 countries for the strength of its auditing and reporting standards. But is this a true reflection of the auditing landscape in the country? And who are the players responsible for keeping the checks and balances in place? Also, how is South Africa faring in comparison to the rest of the continent? That's the hot topic of debate on Auditing South Africa. Hello and welcome. I'm Nozipho, Mbanjwa, and joining me in studio today to share their insights is Bernard Agulhas. He is the CEO of Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors. Muneer Hassan, he's a senior executive at Standards South Africa Institute of Chartered Accountants. Patrick Kabuya, senior financial management specialist, this at the World Bank. And joining us from our bureau in Mauritius is Selvida Naiken. She's the CEO for the Financial Reporting Council in Mauritius. Good afternoon and welcome to everybody with all your long titles. Maybe let's start off with you, Muneer, and just get a sense of the role of the auditing profession when it comes to economic growth.
I think it's important, first of all, to put in context that we need standards. Standards and codes are very important because it levels the playing field. When the investor community wants to take a decision in terms of where to invest and how to invest, if there are standards and codes which one abides by, it makes it more easy to compare information from one entity to the next. So I think, South Africa, in terms of its adoption of international standards on auditing and financial reporting standards is significant and very important, because that plays a significant role when it comes to level the playing fields.
Leveling the playing fields, Bernard, does that sound like something that the IRBA is in the business of doing, especially when it comes to ensuring that we are continuously painting an attractive picture to investors wishing to plug some of their finances in the country?
Yes, the IRBA is the standard setter for auditing. So we issue the auditing standards to auditors. We're also the regulator for the auditing profession. So certainly we do have a role to play in leveling the playing fields. We have about 60 years of experience in regulation, and we've adopted international standards, as was mentioned. We also continue to influence international best practice when it comes to standard setting and to regulation. So I think we're ideally placed to get involved with any kind of regulation in the auditing or the accountancy profession, for that matter. And we will continue to participate in any structures locally and internationally that can achieve that objective.
Taking that into consideration, Patrick, let's maybe get a sense of the state of the profession, not only in South Africa, but on the continent as well. How conducive is the auditing profession to meeting some of the objectives that we've just outlined here?
A lot has been done in terms of the accountancy profession in Africa, but we still have a long way to go. And just to give you a basic, some 3 statistics that you may talk about. If you think of the 55 countries that we have in Africa, only 23 professional accountancy organizations are members of what you call an International Federation of Accountants, which are from 22 countries. So a very small number. Secondly, we have an organization called Pan-African Federation of Accountants, which was established in 2011, that looks after all the professional accountancy bodies in Africa. It has 39 members from 35 countries. The statistics indicate there are 90,000 members from those 39 professional accountancy organizations. And if you have to think of the population of this continent and the number of companies that we need to be served, it's really a number that needs to be improved and to be grown. It's worth to note that out of the 90,000 that I'm mentioning to you, 80% are from 3 countries. Nigeria has 35,000, of the other 32 from South Africa, and 7.5 from Kenya. So the rest of 20% is from all the other African countries. And that number of 90,000, just to mention, is those members who are mainly in Africa, because others are serving from outside. So there's a long way to go, and from that number point of view, and in terms of adopting the standards that we deal with.
A long way to go, and no doubt this will be a very big part of our conversation. But Selvida, let's come to Mauritius first. And in particular, when we talk about competitiveness in sub-Saharan Africa, Mauritius certainly comes to mind, having been one of the few sub-Saharan countries that have really improved when it comes to their ranking auditing. To what extent can this improvement be attributed to the strengthening of the auditing profession as it underpins the economy?
The accounting and auditing profession, as Bernard said, is well regulated, and in Mauritius we adopt the international standard, also the international financial reporting standard, as well as the international auditing standards. But you can see that Mauritius is being ranked 25th among the 144 countries, and I think it's the second in African countries after South Africa. But it's quite well regulated and also been facilitated. But we are, as Mauritius, adopt all international standards since 2001. And with FRC now on board, we make sure that it's being well adopted, well understood, and it's a plus for the country, because all accounts are prepared in a transparent way, auditing in a transparent way is being done, and this is value added for to increase our competitiveness.
And of course, Selvida, having outlined some of the initiatives from the Mauritian side, but perhaps drawing from what Patrick said earlier, is that we're looking at a landscape where there's much still to be done. And I want us to take cognizance maybe just of the key challenges that are going to have to be surmounted should we wish to improve the state of the profession. And maybe let me come back to you, Bernard, on this one. What do you think is the biggest stumbling block when it comes to accelerating and fast-pacing the development of this particular industry and the profession at large?
Well, there has to be a will from the different stakeholders to, first of all, adopt and use international standards, because that is best practice, and that would lead to creating greater governance on the continent. Ultimately, we need to strive to improve governance, financial reporting, not only in South Africa but in Africa, and it's for that reason that even South Africa now is going to play a bigger role in assisting African countries, other countries, with not only strengthening the regulation, but also in adopting the international standards, so that they could also get to the best practice that brought us the #1 position for 5 years in a row. So that's quite important. But besides the political will, the will to adopt the standards, there also has to be the realization that there's a lot of stakeholders that have to contribute towards getting to that position. It's not only regulators, it's not only auditors. Auditors certainly has the most important role to play when it comes to the audit, but all other stakeholders such as audit committees, management, they also have to realize that the quality of reporting is not only dependent on the auditing profession, it also depends on what information they make available to be audited. And the auditor can only report on the outcome of the information that is given to them.
Patrick, would you say that it would be a fair statement to make, given the crisis and the aftermath of the crisis and the analysis about what led to the crisis, that maybe some of this willingness to adopt international standards comes with well-intended skepticism, that there is some grounds why there might be not as much political will as we would want in terms of adopting standards that seem to have failed us in the not-so-recent past?
I'd say yes or no, but I guess for me the most critical is the main countries or stakeholders in countries acknowledging the importance of financial reporting and what it does in contributing to the economic growth, or at the end in contributing to the well-being of the people of the country and service delivery, because that's what is important. All we do at the end of the day is you have to think, how is it going to impact and influence the people that lives in a specific country? And I think that's where we need to enlarge that and increase the level of demand from the stakeholders, from the country, to acknowledge quality information is going to help us to enhance our accountability, to help us to attract the investment and improve our business environment at large, and also from the public sector point of view, enhance the accountability so that people can know whether the resources are being used for the intended purpose and for the delivery of service, which becomes critical.
Patrick has put the public sector smack bang in the middle of our conversation, and Muneer, I want us to maybe tackle this elephant in the room. 5th year in a row in terms of our auditing standards, but when we look at the number of qualified audits we're getting at a municipal level in South Africa, it seems as if it's painting a completely different picture. How do we marry the two?
Yeah, I think there's significant challenges in the public sector. What we're picking up is there's a definite skill shortage within the public sector. So the ability to account and do proper management accounts and proper transparent accounting is an issue. So the upskilling of the people who work within the public sector has been identified as a key issue. And in that regard, what SAICA has done, we have partnered with the AAT in the UK to introduce a qualification known as the AAT, which can help upskill people at that level. A big issue also, issue that has been in the media quite recently, is the issue of the use of consultants, where we've seen that the public sector has blamed the consultants for coming in, not really adding value as such, and then walking away and not transferring the skills and knowledge to those that need to work with it. I think as a profession, as SAICA, we need to be working closer with the Auditor General of South Africa and his office in terms of looking at these challenges and working towards solutions.
Nozipho, I think we should also distinguish between the financial management of an organization and the reporting by the management and the preparation of financial statements, and also those that report on those financial statements, which are the auditors using international standards on auditing. We need to separate those two. And the fact that we have good quality auditing standards means that we can be assured of the right opinion being arrived at by the auditors. If we didn't have high quality auditing standards, we might end up with municipalities, for example, getting clean reports when in fact they should be getting qualified reports. So whether the result or the outcome of the audit is a good or a bad result, it's important that it is the right result. And it's only the auditing high quality standards that could get us to that correct result.
A number of issues raised, and I want to come back to the issue of the skills shortage in the public sector as well as the use of consultants. But before we do that, Selvida, a lot of issues have been placed on the table here in Johannesburg, but maybe let's get a sense of the key challenges that Mauritius as an economy still faces when it comes to further developing the auditing and the accounting profession.
When I am listening to all the debate, I see that quality of auditing and reporting is the end result. I think we should start by governance. I think governance is very important. If we have to get the tone at the top and the governance issues right, everything adopt the good principles of good governance, and definitely coupled with that, adopting the international standards and auditing standards, which is in fact of good quality, which definitely result of the challenges that we need to bring. We need to get an holistic approach. We cannot concentrate only on the reporting, on the auditing. There need to be everybody on board and every regulator is on board, get the holistic approach, because it should start by governance. From the point, these are the challenges. Governance is a key issue in every situation.
A holistic and comprehensive approach, Patrick. This is what Selvida is putting on the table.
Yes.
And I want us perhaps to just think about the municipal level once again, since that has arisen as an issue or a concern for us to talk about. If you were in a position to advise Minister Pravin Gordhan, who's recently taken on that post, as holistic as we may want to be, there needs to be a starting point somewhere. How do we start the steps to ensure that we are also improving in the number of qualified audits that we're seeing at that municipal level?
Okay, Nozipho, I'll try to address that by thinking on the topic we are addressing today on accountancy profession and what the role would be. And here I would acknowledge, first of all, that South Africa has done incredibly well, as Muneer was addressing, on some of the initiatives they are taking to build the capacity. And AAT is a critical example, and I think from our own perspective, from the bank point of view, is we want to get some such of initiatives which are being done very well in South Africa to be mapped and to be implemented in other countries. So you just share that knowledge and they can be tapped into. But in terms of the advice, coming back to your question, is how can we accelerate such a program like AAT in South Africa and can be taken on board in all the municipalities in this country? I think secondly is on the advice on the capacity building is on the qualifications, like the assessments that you've done in this country on the professions. Is most of the qualifications, how do we include public sector as an element, not just focusing on the private sector? Because you've seen on the assessment of the current qualifications, it's more private sector oriented. Yes. How do you change that? And third is how do we bring more people to serve in the public sector? I think SAICA, yes, has tried to notch on the lower bottom on the certificate, but if you think about the chartered accountants qualification, and I'm sure Muneer could qualify, is of the 35,000 members, less than 3 or 4% are working in the public sector. So those initiatives from public sector point of view or from accountancy profession, they can contribute. So
some real proposals from a policy perspective that we're hearing from Patrick. Muneer, does this sound like a space that SAICA could fill in terms of improving on the work that you're already doing in terms of the initiatives with the AAT and the likes, but ensuring that the pipeline of accountants or chartered accountants and auditors positioned for government play is actually growing daily? Definitely, Nozipho. I think from, like Patrick has alluded to, what we have done from a academic and a syllabus point of view is we've taken aboard the ROSC recent recommendations as well, and we've actually built the public sector component into our exam curricula, so that has become part of the syllabi as well. So the standards, the public sector reporting standards, are now part of the syllabus. And that will in tune then feed out the pipeline ultimately in terms of numbers into the public sector. I think from the 37,000 members, our stats indicate that about 1,500 of that membership serves in the public sector at the moment. I think there's a definite desire and need to increase the pipeline and to make more chartered accountants attractive to go into work into this into the public sector, because that is the bigger half of the economy when we look at it. And of course, we'll get deeper into some of the regulatory issues in a moment. I want us to maybe put another layer to this issue of skills and capacity that is currently on the table, and maybe talk about transformation and the pace of transformation in this particular industry, and whether we're making progress in the desired direction. The IRBA certainly relies on the initiatives from the Institute to increase the pipeline. So you can only become an auditor if you are a chartered accountant. And therefore, we encourage and work together with the Institute and with other stakeholders like the Auditor General in the public sector, as well as the audit firms, so that we can, transformation is not something that you can tackle on your own. And therefore, it's important that we work together on initiatives and ultimately increase the pipeline that comes through, because of those chartered accountants that qualify, a few of them will become auditors. And therefore, indirectly, whatever happens in the chartered accountancy profession will also feed through to the auditing profession. The IRBA is a signatory to the CA Charter, so the CA profession has its own charter, and we serve on the council so that we can influence transformation from that perspective as well. And the IRBA itself has formed a transformation committee with the various stakeholders, and we're driving initiatives, performing research into what it is that would not only attract people to the auditing profession, but to retain them in the profession. And it's not always straightforward. So it doesn't mean that research that was done a couple of years ago will still be relevant today. We need to see what the needs are of the current pipeline and try to address that. Are the demographics of the pool that you are drawing from changing? That's a very good question, because we can only change the demographics of those that come into the profession if the ones that
come into the students that come into the study the degrees do change, and so we are fully reliant on those that come into the profession or rather into the university studying the degree that will lead to a CA or an audit qualification, and therefore we need to influence those numbers at university and even at school level to make them aware of the CA profession, of the auditing profession. But we have to start a lot earlier than when they are in the profession to try and retain them. We need to actually start much earlier.
Selvida, let's draw some comparative analysis between South Africa and Mauritius when it comes to developing a pipeline to make sure we meet the demands of skill and capacity that a vibrant auditing industry requires. From a Mauritian point of view, what are you doing at an institutional level to make sure that demand is meeting supply?
In Mauritius we had about 2,500 professional accountants, but we have only 200 auditors. And we see that there is very few professionals who want to join the auditing profession. Definitely, auditing requires more professional skepticism, more competence, skill than just complete a financial statement complying with financial reporting standards. I think we should encourage people to join the auditing profession because this creates competition, and we can increase the level of quality also, because the number of auditors only 200 as compared to 2,500. How we can do that is just influence the professional body, the accountancy body, to have a separate paper on auditing. And you can be a professional accountant and you can be a professional auditor if you have a separate paper. I think all here in Mauritius we have ACCA, Chartered Accountant, and CIMA. They are all foreign professional bodies. I think we could influence the ACCA or the Chartered Accountant to have a separate paper for auditing, so that it can give due respect to the auditing profession, and that it requires different skills.
Patrick,
different competence.
Patrick, just as we wrap up on the skills and capacity side of this conversation, any best practice that you think we could draw from the global sphere and say this is a country that has maybe had an innovative approach to how they build this capacity, and maybe we could draw some lessons applicable for sub-Saharan Africa?
We adopting different styles on more regional approach, and I guess here I can say that South Africa, having been listed #1 for the last 5 years, the best example comes from South Africa in terms of developing that number, and that's what we want to model to the others. But what we're also trying to deal with is to enter into what we call like twinning arrangements, where we have an organization like from UK, ICAW, Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, partnering with African professional accountancy organization through what we call a twinning partnership, not like a consulting. And that model is helping them to develop a qualification and implement that qualification over a number of years when this institution holds their hand. 2-3 years down the line. And that model to us, I think it's credible, it's working well, and it's going to help to develop that skill capacity we're dealing with.
But Bernard, of course, the skills and the capacity that we're speaking about now has to operate within a particular environment that has certain regulatory conditions that govern it. And perhaps maybe this is an opportunity to begin to tease out some of the regulatory trends that we're seeing not only in South Africa, but into sub-Saharan Africa.
Thanks, Nozipho. The South Africa belongs to an organization called International Forum of Independent Audit Regulators. We're a founding member, and that organization consists of about 50 countries or jurisdictions, and we share international best practice in regulation, but also talk about the challenges in regulation. So it's important that what's on our agenda at the moment includes competency, skills, capacity building in the auditing profession, and most countries are dealing with the same issues. Currently, there's only 4 South African countries that are members of IFR. There'll be Mauritius, Botswana, Egypt, and South Africa. And they have IFR as a regional outreach program whereby countries like South Africa and Mauritius needs to support and assist other countries with regulation. So we have started a program in South Africa already to support other African countries and to reach out to them and assist them in strengthening their regulation. So it's important that it's it's not only something that we do in South Africa, we need to do it for the continent and get the quality of auditing and our regulation improved in Africa. The challenges or the trends in regulation at the moment really centers around over and under regulation, something very critical to us as regulators. There should be a situation where we can achieve balanced regulation, which we also refer to as right touch regulation as opposed to light touch regulation. Light touch is where there's weak regulation or the profession is not in a position where we can actually not have strong regulation. Right touch regulation refers to balanced regulation. Auditors shouldn't be over or under regulated because it places not only regulatory burden on the regulator itself but also on the profession. It becomes
and to what
difficult.
extent are we seeing an adoption and a move towards right touch regulation? Are you finding that this trend has had significant uptake on the continent?
It depends on the status of the profession largely. If the profession is advanced, then you don't need to have over-regulation of the profession. But until you get to that stage, and we normally refer to a pendulum, the pendulum can either be far right or far left. If the profession is not in a mature state, then it's very difficult to not have strong regulation. But eventually, as the profession improves, so the regulation can become more balanced. And therefore, the level of regulation depends largely on the state of the profession. But it's also important that when you do have regulation, and especially when you have over-regulation, that you have something else to balance out that over-regulation. And internationally, we're talking more and more, and most regulators outside of the continent follow an approach where we have remedial action that we need the auditors to implement, but the regulators work together with the auditors, retaining its independence, because independence is very important for the regulator. While retaining its independence, we work on plans, or we expect the auditors to provide a plan to us to say how they'll fix any problems or any findings that we raise during our inspections. So that is a big topic of discussion at the moment.
And a very important part of the discussion. We're going to take a short commercial break. When we come back, we dig just a little bit deeper into understanding the regulatory trends on the continent, and in particular the issue that's been raised, that of the independence of regulators in Africa. We'll see you right after the break. Welcome back to this special debate on the auditing landscape in South Africa. Still with me in studio, Bernard Agulhas, CEO of the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors, Muneer Hassan, Senior Executive at Standards South Africa Institute of Chartered Accountants, Patrick Kabuya, Senior Financial Management Specialist at the World Bank South Africa, and joining us from our bureau in Mauritius is Selvida Naiken. She is the CEO for Financial Reporting Council in Mauritius. Selvida, we'll start off with you. Just before we went to break, we're trying to find the balance between over-regulation and under-regulation. Perhaps give us a sense of the trajectory that Mauritius is on, and whether you have any insights into the direction that you think the continent should be taking when it comes to this specific debate.
I'm just thinking everything that I do is for a purpose. Why we want to regulate, and the purpose to regulate the profession is to ensure quality audit services or quality reporting is being provided. And we need to have a body to ensure that this is being done. And it's a regulate, as Bernard says, should be the balanced way. We have to ensure what is needed to ensure quality. We have to be as a facilitator also, and at the same time keeping our independence. Of course, we need to do that. And we need to facilitate the auditor to ensure putting the system in place, ensure understanding of the auditing standard, understanding of the requirements to be able to deliver quality audits. And there need to be a body that be sure to be independent from the audit profession, definitely. And this is our purpose. Our purpose is, at the end of the day, what we want to achieve. We want to achieve that the investors are satisfied with the way the audit profession is doing their work, and the auditor is competent enough, is skilled, professional, and there is a comfort. We need to give that comfort to investors and to any investors who want to come into the business community, and this is what we want to achieve at the end of the day. We can't have over-regulation. At the end of the day, we won't have auditors. The auditors won't come in the audit profession. We need to strike the right balance, and this is what we are doing here in Mauritius, and try to get everybody on board so that they achieve that objective. At the end of the day, the whole country, the whole community, even the African continent, the whole world have to win. There should be a win-win situation.
An interesting point that Selvida's just raised there, Patrick, and that is over-regulation could potentially be a big threat to the livelihood of the auditing profession. Your take on that, and in particular the World Bank's take on finding that balance between over-regulation and under-regulation?
From our perspective, the main thing is to ensure there is fit for purpose. And as Selvida alluded to, is why are we talking about regulation, and what is it that we refer to regulation? And in actual sense, all we are looking at is to protect public interest, because that's a whole analogy. And on the regulations, one has to think of a number of dimensions. And I just focus on three, is you want to regulate for someone to be an auditor, what is the qualification he goes or she goes through? So how is that quality? Secondly is, what are the standards he's complying with from the accounting and auditing to prepare financial statement or conduct the audit? And thirdly is, how is she or he being monitored that is complying with those aspects? And in our perspective, from the bank point of view, we say then those regulations may vary from totally independent, as Bernard is talking about, or can be self-regulation, where the professional accountancy itself does all the work, or you can do the combination of the two. And on our work then is we review on where would a country fall into. Would you allow it to have combined, or would it be independent? So, and some countries, of course, then fall into different arenas depending on the level of development of the country, maturity of the accountancy profession, and of the past experience. So those forms the basics and the dynamics of where we position on the regulation. And I repeat, it's fit for purpose with the aim of protecting the public interest.
Muneer, Sub-Saharan Africa, we're dealing with the vast majority of developing countries, and some that are still maybe lagging behind, and yet we are struggling with the model that we're saying fits. And where would you put your voice in this particular debate? Should we be going for self-regulation? Should we be looking at pure and total independence? Should we be looking at a combination, as Patrick has put on the table? What do you think developing countries should be doing?
A good question, and Nozipho. I think, like Patrick said, it's all about looking at a country and looking at the maturity level of the country in terms of where that country is at a particular state in time. So South Africa at one stage, the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors was not independent. It was housed within SAICA, within the professional body. And we've matured there. We've gone a long way. We've now got the audit regulator independent, totally as separate, which is required. The next form of regulation from a South African perspective would be to regulate the accountancy profession. In the past recent years, we've seen the tax being regulated, the tax arena as well being regulated from a SARS point of view. And that was sort of the mixed model that they used, that Patrick alluded to, where there's sort of a regulatory oversight, but recognizing the professional bodies that are there. So I think in terms of a sub-Saharan African continent, each country needs to look at itself and evaluate in terms of this maturity level, where are they currently, and then to aspire to full-on independent regulation. There are certain aspects, certainly, for example, when it does come to audit regulation, that has to be independent. That has to be full-on independent because of the independence issues and the assurance levels that are given at that level. But when we talk of issues of tax regulation, accountancy regulation, the mixed model could work. You don't want to actually push it to a full-on independent regulation.
Ultimately, the regulation is for the protection of the public. The public needs to have the confidence that the profession on which they rely, the profession that gives them opinions on financial statements, that helps them to take decisions on whether they should invest in a company or in a country, they need to be confident that that profession is operating at the level that they expect. So there has to be some oversight over the standards that are being applied, over the ethics that are being applied, and somebody has to inspect and take action if if that does not happen. And that is what gives the public the confidence. And that's why when we start talking about the regulation of accountants, that is also what is needed in addition to auditors, accountants also need to be regulated. The public needs to know that when they rely on these professionals, that there is a proper regulation of those individuals.
Patrick, I see you want to come in on that one.
Yeah, and I wanted to refer, in South Africa, Nozipho, we finished a report on the accountancy profession in 2013, and one of our main recommendations is what the fellow panelists have talked about, regulating the accountancy profession. Professional bodies themselves, not the individuals. Through our review, we realized there are 12 professional accountancy organizations, but there is no monitoring or oversight over them. So all you're calling for is, through a legal mandate, an institution being created, it may be an existing one or whatever, but to look after the qualification for those professional accountancy organizations, to look after accrediting them, and monitor them that all the services that they're offering to their members are in line with what is stipulated and what is required. Because what you're alluding to is they offer quality qualifications and quality services to the members of the public.
And what has been the reception to that particular recommendation amongst the others that have come out of the report specifically for South Africa?
It's incredible also to know that the review that we conduct is also involving many stakeholders, so there was an acknowledgement that that's something that needs to be done. We do this through the Ministry of Finance, because they're the ones who invite us through this process, and recently I saw the Minister of Finance during the budget speech also made a statement that these are some of the recommendations they are considering to start implementing, and obviously there is a process that needs to come on board, because you need to change the regulation and also determine where you're going to house this the responsibility, because it needs to be in an institution which has the adequate capacity, both financially and also from the human point of view, and also with an independent board, because you don't want to interfere or doing self-regulation as far as it's concerned.
And finally, Selvida, before we move on from this topic, let's get a sense from you when it comes to the actual regulation of the accounting profession. We've heard that there has been recommendations from the South African front to try and regulate accountancy just a little bit more. What has been the experience in Mauritius on that front?
For the accounting profession, we have a different institution looking into that. We have the Mauritius Institute of Professional Accountant, where they all have to be registered there, and also there is some regulation instead of complying with IFA Code of Ethics and disciplinary board. But for it's more structured with respect to auditing profession, where we have the Financial Reporting Council. The accounting profession is mostly self-regulated in Mauritius, because we have the ACCA representative, we have the chartered, we have the CIMA. It's a self-regulated body mainly. But the auditing profession is more regulated in Mauritius.
Let's get a sense of, thanks, Selvida. Let's get a sense from the desk in terms of how you've received some of these recommendations. We're hearing in Mauritius that self-regulation seems to be the mode that is in, or the model that is on the ground. Greater regulation, as Patrick has proposed and put on the table. How does SAICA respond to this? And also, what does this mean for the IRBA? And maybe start off with you, Muneer.
Thank you. I think from SAICA's point of view, we fully acknowledge, and we were, I think Patrick has alluded early to it, we were part of the steering committee. So when the recommendations came out, we gave input into and thought into the process as well, and early input into the recommendation, which was good to have that input at an early stage. I think from SAICA's point of view, we acknowledge that when one looks at public protection and when there is a service being rendered for a fee, that there needs to be some kind of fallback to an institute or the accountancy organization if the service was dissatisfying. So we fully acknowledge where the World Bank and where the recommendation is coming from. I alluded to earlier that we need to look at where we are in terms of maturity levels. We technically have self-regulation, because we've also got a number of accountancy organizations at the moment which checks things like quality, education, and the issues that Patrick alluded to. But I think from a maturity level, we can now move a step further, and certainly in the direction of regulation with some kind of oversight in terms of maintaining or ensuring that all the professional organizations that do operate comply with a certain minimum standard that is set out.
It really comes back to leveling the playing fields that we talked about earlier and consistency amongst all accountants. At the moment, auditors are regulated at a very high level, which is the way it should be. They render a public service, and therefore when there's reliance from the public, then there must be some regulation, so that's at the right level. Unfortunately, there's also accountants that are not auditors and that are not registered with the IRBA that perform very similar services. Auditors don't only perform auditing services, they provide a range of professional services which remain unregulated. Now, for the public to have confidence in those services as well, it's important that they are not equally regulated, but that they are regulated maybe at a different level, as was mentioned, through the professional body itself. Some regulation of the professional body, but there should be some kind of oversight over those professional people as well.
And maybe let's take a step back and maybe look at the broader picture now. In particular, when we talk about the African growth story, we're also talking about lots of private sector players either expanding across the continent or coming into the continent. And the questions of corporate taxation always come back to the center of this debate. And I see Patrick indicating to Muneer slightly that this one's coming for you. So maybe, Muneer, let's put the question in front of you. Let's talk about key trends that we're seeing. And my question then becomes, is Africa in the driving seat of its own destination now, especially when it comes to rethinking some of the rules of the game that govern how we tax the players on the field?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been a significant change in the policy thinking, if one is to think about it from a tax policy point of view, to make South Africa more attractive so that international companies can actually come into South Africa, invest here, and then expand their offering and services into the rest of Africa. So there has been a lot of leeway in terms of policy thinking from a tax point of view to allow international companies to set up headquarter companies and expand into Africa. A lot more can be done. Yes, because we want to be seen as a African investment center for the rest of the world, and to create that investment as well. In terms of corporate tax rates, there's always a challenge because we always want to take the best of the share as well. We're always competing. We're competing with Mauritius on the side as well. They have a very low tax jurisdiction rate, so we're very competitive when it comes to issues like low tax jurisdictions. And in terms of the taxes that we do implement at the moment, it's quite challenging and it's quite difficult to level the playing field.
Selvida, I think the ball has been put into your courts, and perhaps let's have a quick conversation about how Mauritius has managed to really change its the brand perception that it had previously of being a tax haven to an economy that's based on transparent and strong institutions. How has this come about, and are there any attributes that you could single out and say this has enabled that brand 360 transition that has taken place?
No, Mauritius, as per OECD check, has been ranked in the whitelist and not a tax haven. But Mauritius has has set up all the infrastructure that enable investments and easy investment, which is a well-regulated country. And on top of that, it is well-governed because governance is on top of the agenda of the government. It's a well-governed country. We need to have all the elements, all the ingredients present to ensure that investment come in, and not to be taxed as a tax haven, not to brand as a tax haven. We need to have political stability, economic development, corporate governance, and on top of that, all the financial financial regulatory bodies. It's in there, and we try as far as possible to meet the developed countries' level playing fields, and it still continue to improve. And this is how we do things. We're a small country, and we try to do the same way as the developed countries. as you say, in the Financial Stability Board, we have the 12 standards that need to be followed to have financial stability. Mauritius is following all these 12 standards. Mauritius is adopting good principles of corporate governance, OECD good principles governance. It is in fact in the Financial Reporting Act where all public interest entities have to comply comply or explain when they are not complying. We adopt all the best ingredients that need to be adopted.
The best ingredients that need to be adopted. Bernard, what role does regulation play in advancing the taxation transparency agenda, if any?
The previous Minister of Finance had introduced a system whereby he recognized certain controlling bodies, and those controlling bodies have then been given the responsibility to regulate their members. That is important because in the past tax practitioners were not regulated and they didn't even have to belong to a professional body. Now, in order to practice tax, any kind of tax advice or assisting with preparation of income tax returns, all tax practitioners have to register with a controlling body, and that forces them then to comply with the rules and the regulations of that body, and we certainly supported and welcomed that initiative from the former minister. The minister has also said that if that does not work, then he will appoint a regulator for tax practitioners, and at the moment I think we in a more balanced kind of regulation whereby it's done through the controlling bodies, and hopefully it will work so that all tax practitioners can register with those controlling bodies and be required to comply with their requirements, which is ultimately the requirements from the Minister of Finance. And it's very important that we do have these measures in place because ultimately we're also trying to address corruption and fraud and from a tax perspective, correct tax returns, and somebody has to ensure that there's oversight over the services that are rendered in that environment.
And what we're hearing, what I've picked up from what Bernard's saying, is that there's always the possibility of more regulation, which for many investors might just be construed as more bureaucracy. You know, to what extent are we solving the solutions by becoming more bureaucratic and in the process increasingly becoming uncompetitive?
That's a critical question, and I think what it boils back to is the cost of doing business. And I think these two countries, Mauritius and South Africa, as you compare in terms of the ranking from the bank on doing business environment, they fare very well. But linking this to the accountancy profession on, say, the small and medium enterprises, we've been talking about standards. So for the small and medium enterprises, you don't require them to comply with the same level of standards as the big, I call them the big enterprises, or the big boys as you would refer to them. So making it more simpler for the small and medium enterprises, even micro entities, on the standards they need to comply with. And it's gone to an extent, a country like South Africa, where for the micro entities, then you don't even need them to be preparing audited financial statements, or they're just required to review them. So that kind of financial statements. And that boils back to the costs that they refer to when they are dealing with business. So it comes back to that point I talked about, fit for purpose.
What do you make then of, say, for example, the recent establishment of a small business ministry in South Africa? Do you believe that there should be some key focus areas in line with the proposals that you've just made that the minister should be looking at as she begins to craft the mandate of this particular ministry?
I would assume that would come then from the different stakeholders who are involved. In the topic you're dealing with here is from the accountancy profession. For the profession here, dealing with SAICA and the different, would need to approach the Ministry of Small and Industries and say, as far as the small industries and our profession is concerned, what are the things that you need to put into place to ensure that there is cost of business for them is made easier, and at the same time, obviously, be able to meet the respective responsibilities and make profits for their shareholders.
Muneer?
Thanks. What SAICA has done in this regard is we've done research already in terms of our survey and our members to understand what are the key issues that SMEs, small, medium entities are actually experiencing when it comes to barriers and challenges. And we thought that the number one issue that will come up would have been access to finance, but it wasn't that. It was actually the difficulty in terms of dealing with bureaucracy and, you know, red tape, if you want to call it. That came up as number one. So there's a whole series of findings that we've actually packed together, and we would be engaging with the Ministry of Small Business to take these forward and then to unpack it and seek solutions as well.
Selvida, here in South Africa, if we're looking at the auditing landscape, we see a few big players in terms of the big firms. Back in Mauritius, how is the industry's landscape structured? And in particular, are there specific challenges that smaller players will face that are worth noting and should be discussed?
Yes, it is a problem, I think, around the world. The Big Four is occupying about 80% or 90% of the market. And this is where the regulator role also come into play. We need to increase that competition, create that competition. When every auditors will be on the same level playing field, then we can say that every auditors can give quality audit. Why choose the Big Four? And also, I appreciate that the European Union is coming up with changes about tendering of auditors, rotation of auditors. I think we need to do that to make sure that everybody get a chance in the audit market, in the audit profession, because there is a regulator. We ensure that quality audit is being delivered. Why not consider any auditor doing the work? Why choose only the Big Four? This is we need to work more on that. We are trying to ensure that all auditors are delivering the same quality level of services. This is where the regulator role comes into play also.
Bernard, is that a space and a challenge that you've taken up?
Yes, we certainly have. We leave the institute. We leave it to the institute to support the auditors when it comes to small and medium practices. That's the audit firms themselves. But the IRBA, besides being the protector of the public, we're also the custodian of the auditing profession. And recently we've taken the decision that we also have a role to play to support auditors, especially small and medium practices, because they are the ones that audit the small and medium enterprises. And we need to know what the challenges are that these small and medium practices experience, and then if we can support them while retaining our independence, we should. And we certainly have formed also, we have an initiative whereby we're trying to provide such support to them. What is also important to us is that there is sufficient competition. I think Selvida mentioned the competitiveness in the market, and therefore we encourage the small firms to compete with the bigger firms and the international or global firms, so that ultimately, of course, when there's competition, audit quality will be improved, and it also provides opportunities for those SMPs. So indirectly, the IRBA is involved, and we do support the growth in the SMP market.
Muneer, I'll come back to you for the final word, but let's just touch base with Patrick before we close. And in particular, maybe Patrick, a comment on this particular conversation, but also your key takeaway when it comes, in particular, around the ROSCE and the key recommendations that you would want to make sure are taken away from this conversation.
Yeah, coming back to Bernard's comments, I think back to our report that you've alluded to, two things for the small and medium enterprises. For them to compete, you recommended that they think about merger within the country and merger with other international networks, because then they would have the capacity. But secondly, is also to think of expanding of other businesses. Don't just think about auditing, but think of offering corporate services, accountancy services. And those are tools that currently exist by International Federation of Accountants. Very critical. As far as the report is concerned, I think our main recommendation is on the oversight of the professional accountancy organizations, not the individual. I repeat that. Obviously, there are some other things that we talked about IRBA that they need to enhance on in order to offer value when they are doing audit quality reviews. And of importance is within this organization on the oversight to think of a model where we build more accountants for this country, not just at the chartered accountants level, but the whole supply chain, at bookkeeping, because all that needs to be alluded to. And our view is this organization that may be created need to promote all those professional bodies so that we can build the pipeline of accountants we require. The number here shows that there are around 60,000 in the 12 professional accountancy bodies. And if you think of this country, the statistics we got that time, there were more than 1.36 companies that need to be served. So there's a room and a lot of way to go.
Quite certainly a gap that has to be met. And Muneer, in your final comment, the opportunity for the profession to play that role of building trust, not only in the economy, but also the trust of the public.
Yeah, I think as a professional institute, we have a huge, massive role to play in there. One, in supporting SMPs, so, you know, from that particular perspective, from the education front, training initiatives, making sure they are sharp, up to date, so that they can deliver the quality at the right level as well. As an institute, we take it on ourselves to make sure that we communicate the technical changes. They are ahead of the game all the time, ahead of the curve, so that they can deliver these good quality services to their clients as well. So from a gap analysis, we certainly take it on ourselves to make sure that we keep them abreast of their game at all levels.
And that's where we finish this conversation. We've come to the end of the special auditing focused broadcast. Thank you to my guest, Bernard Agulhas, CEO at the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors, Muneer Hassan, Senior Executive at the Standard South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, Patrick Kabuya, Senior Financial Management Specialist at the World Bank in South Africa, and from our bureau in Mauritius, Selvida Naiken, CEO for the Financial Reporting Council in Mauritius. Until next time, it's goodbye and thank you for joining us.